There's a press photograph from the courtyard at Fontainebleau. 2 officers shaking hands, service dress, staff cars behind them, a Belgian general standing off to the left of frame. The agency caption gives the morning of the 4th of April, 1957, and identifies the man taking the handshake as the new commander-in-chief of Allied land forces, Central Europe. He is wearing the uniform of the Bundeswehr, an army that has existed for 16 months. He will turn 60 that October. Under his headquarters sit the Allied ground forces of NATO's central region. American, British, French, Belgian, and Dutch divisions, the Northern Army Group on the North German Plain, and the Central Army Group down to the Bavarian Alps. It is the first time a German officer has held a NATO commander-in-chief post. The chateau he is standing in is roughly 35 miles southeast of Paris. 13 years earlier, almost to the season, the same man was a general lieutenant in the German Army, chief of the General Staff of Army Group B, running the operational headquarters that fought the Normandy campaign under Erwin Rommel. 12 years, 6 months, and 28 days before that photograph was taken, the Gestapo arrested him at that headquarters on suspicion of complicity in the attempt on Hitler's life. His name is Hans Speidel. Most of you know the Normandy part, and a good number of you know he was arrested in September 1944 and survived it. The part that gets left out of nearly every account is what he was doing between June 1940 and March 1942, and what the headquarters he ran in Paris put its name to in that period. That is the file. All of it in one register. He was born in Metzingen, in Württemberg, on the 28th of October, 1897. He entered the Grenadier Regiment König Karl, the 5th Württemberg, as an officer candidate on the 30th of November, 1914, at 17, lieutenant the following November, company commander on the Somme, then regimental adjutant, Flanders and Cambrai. The Golden Württemberg Military Merit Medal on the 20th of February, 1917. That decoration was the kingdom's highest bravery award available to a junior officer, and it is the first hard entry in his file. He stayed in the 100,000-man Reichswehr, Oberleutnant on the 1st of April, 1925. In the same period, he took a doctorate in history, magna cum laude, with a dissertation on the military politics of 1813. That doctorate is the reason his name appears in the records as Dr. Speidel, and the reason a Bundeswehr barracks would eventually be named General Dr. Speidel Kaserne. The Treaty of Versailles had abolished the German General Staff, so the Army trained one in secret and called it something else. Speidel came through that course and qualified in 1929, in the same cohort as Adolf Heusinger. Hold that name. The 2 of them will finish this story standing next to each other. Hauptmann on the 1st of February, 1932. Then the French thread starts. In October 1933, he went to Paris as assistant to the German military attaché. He learned the country, the language, and the officer corps. At the end of 1936, he was running Fremde Heere West, the German Army's intelligence branch for the Western armies, which meant he spent the years before the war reading the French order of battle for a living. In 1937, he was first General Staff Officer of the 33rd Infantry Division at Mannheim, Oberstleutnant in the General Staff on the 1st of January 1939. In the campaign of 1940, he was Chief of Staff of 9th Army Corps. Then Paris fell, and the German army had to administer a country of 40 million people, and it reached for the officer who spoke French. In June 1940, he became Chief of Staff to the military commander of Greater Paris. From there, he moved into the headquarters that ran the whole occupied zone, the Militärbefehlshaber in Frankreich, the military commander in France, quartered at the Hotel Majestic on Avenue Kléber in the 16th arrondissement. The post is often described loosely. The precise version matters. That headquarters ran on 2 staffs, a command staff and an administrative staff. The administrative staff was headed by a civilian, State Minister Jonathan Schmid. The command staff was headed by Speidel. He held it from the summer of 1940 until the spring of 1942. He was promoted Oberst in the General Staff on the 1st of February 1941, and he ran that staff as a colonel. From the 16th of October 1940, his military commander was General der Infanterie Otto von Stülpnagel. Speidel had a political position, and he put it in writing. Dieter Kruger, working from the headquarters files, documents a run of reports going up to high command, arguing that Germany should conclude a peace treaty with France and take it on as a junior partner rather than hold it down and strip it. His warning to Berlin was that French leadership was increasingly waiting to see whether Britain or Germany would win, and that concessions were the only way to stop that drift. Hitler was not interested in any arrangement that reduced German control. The reports went nowhere. That is the plea in Kruger's title, and it failed. For the first year, the occupation was mainly administrative. Requisition, currency, the demarcation line, the registration of the Jewish population, and from 1940 onward, the transfer of Jewish businesses into non-Jewish ownership, which the military administration supervised. That is a documented function of the majestic, and it belongs in the file. Then the invasion of the Soviet Union started on the 22nd of June, 1941, and the French Communist Party went to armed action. On the 21st of August, a German naval cadet named Alphonse Moser was shot dead on the platform at Barbès-Rochechouart station in Paris. 3 men were executed in reprisal on the 29th. On the 3rd of September, another German was killed and 3 hostages were shot on the 6th. Attacks between the 6th and the 13th produced 10 executions on the 16th. A killing on the 15th produced 12 executions on the 20th. Railway sabotage on the 18th and 19th produced 2 more on the 24th. Those figures are from Sven Olaf Bergutz, writing in the Vierteljahrshefte für Zeitgeschichte in 2003. They come out of the Majestic's own files. On the 16th of September, 1941, Wilhelm Keitel issued the order from OKW that set the exchange rate. For the life of 1 German soldier, the death penalty for up to 100 communists. 12 days later, on the 28th of September, Otto von Stülpnagel issued his own hostage code for France, the document the French records call the Code des Otages. It laid down who could be taken, how they would be selected, and the procedure to be followed. It is a staff product. Staff products come out of a command staff. On the 20th of October, 1941, the Feldkommandant of Nantes, Karl Hotz, was shot dead in the street. The next day in Bordeaux, a German officer named Hans Reimers was killed. The reprisal order named a round number for each city. In Nantes and its region, it was carried out over 2 days. 27 men were shot at the quarry at Chateaubriand on the 22nd, 16 at Nantes, and 5 at Mont-Valérien outside Paris on the 24th. 48 in total, against an order for 2 more. At the Souge camp outside Bordeaux, the Bordeaux quota was executed in full on the 24th. Across those 3 days, 98 men were shot. In December, after further attacks, Otto von Stülpnagel proposed the execution of 100 hostages. 95 were shot. Alongside them went a fine of 1 billion francs levied on the Jewish population of the occupied zone, and the deportation to the east of 1,000 Jews and 500 young communists. Here's the part of the record that almost never gets said out loud on this subject, and it is the reason this video exists. Kruger's study of the Paris years came out in 2021 from Miles Verlag under the title Verständigung mit Frankreich, the vain plea of Colonel Dr. Hans Speidel, Paris 1940 to 1942. What he documents is that Speidel and Otto von Stülpnagel both fought Berlin over the mass shootings, and that they fought on grounds of effect rather than principle. Their argument was that shooting hostages in batches was driving the French population toward the resistance and destroying any prospect of a political settlement. Kruger also documents what Speidel proposed instead. He proposed replacing the mass shooting of hostages with the deportation of communists and Jews to the east. Hitler took both, the executions and the deportations. I think that is the single most important document in Speidel's file, and it is the one his own books do not contain. His account of Normandy, published in 1949, and his volume of recollections, published in 1977, both carry the Paris years. Neither carries that proposal. When a memoir omits a specific proposal that the same author's headquarters files preserve, that is not a memory failure. That is an editorial decision, and the file wins. Otto von Stülpnagel reported himself sick on the 5th of February 1942, asked to be relieved 10 days later, and was gone on the 23rd. His cousin, Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, took the post 2 days after that. Speidel left Paris on the 23rd of March, 1942. Before he left, he had commissioned a document. Ernst Jünger, the writer, was serving on the Majestic staff. On Speidel's orders, Jünger compiled a study of the hostage question, case by case, effect by effect, 77 pages, with a 29-page appendix containing translations of the farewell letters the executed men had written to their families. Jünger worked on it from late October 1941 to February 1942 and updated it to the 2nd of April. I think that commission is the strangest single item in the whole file. The headquarters that drafted the hostage procedure also ordered the compilation of the record of what the procedure produced, in the men's own words, translated for German readers. Bergutz establishes the commissioning and the dating and confirms both against a later exchange of letters between Speidel and Jünger. There is no reading of that document under which the staff did not know precisely what it was doing. The French Ministry of the Armed Forces gives the total for the Paris Military Command Zone. Between September 1941 and October 1943, 735 people were executed as hostages in that zone. Adding the 75 shot in Nord and Pas-de-Calais, which answered to Brussels rather than Paris, gives 810. On the 25th of March, 1942, 2 days after leaving Paris, Speidel took over as chief of the General Staff of 5th Army Corps on the Eastern Front. He held it until the 1st of June. The Corps was under 4th Panzer Army in Army Group Center, in the Gzhatsk sector west of Moscow, and it spent most of his tenure refitting after the winter. Those dates come from the Corps establishment records. 2 months and 1 week. That winter he served with a German staff attached to the Italian 8th Army on the Don, through the period in which that army was broken open and destroyed. General Major on the 1st of January 1943. Then he moved to the formation that would carry him for the next 14 months. Army Detachment Lance was formed on the 1st of February 1943. Hubert Lance held it for 3 weeks. Werner Kempf took it on the 21st of February, and it became Army Detachment Kempf. It fought at Kharkov in February and March. In July, on the southern shoulder of the Kursk salient, it attacked out of Belgorod with 3rd Panzer Corps leading, on the right flank of the 4th Panzer Army thrust. Otto Wöhler took command on the 16th of August, and the formation was redesignated 8th Army later that month. Speidel was its chief of the General Staff, General Lieutenant on the 1st of January 1944. On the 1st of April 1944, he was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, and the citation carries him as chief of the General Staff of 8th Army. There is a wrinkle in the paperwork here, and I will show it to you rather than tidy it away. The 8th Army establishment records carry Speidel in post until the 15th of May, 1944. The Army Group B records have him taking over in France a month before that. I take the France date as the operative one and the May entry as a personnel file catching up with a man who had already gone. 2 record sets, 1 overlap, and it is worth knowing that the German administrative record is not seamless even at Army level in the spring of 1944. That is the operational resume, and it is a serious one. Kharkov, Kursk, the Dnieper withdrawals, the Cherkasy winter, a staff officer with a doctorate and a fighting army behind him. In April 1944, he went west. Rommel's chief of staff at Army Group B was General Lieutenant Alfred Gauss, who had been with him since Africa. Rommel put the change on the record as a medical matter, a concussion from Gazala that had not healed and doubts about performance under pressure. The domestic reason, which the Rommel literature has never much disguised, was a falling out between the 2 wives. Gauss went on the 21st of April. Speidel had taken over the responsibilities on the 15th. He inherited a headquarters at the Chateau of La Roche-Guyon on the Seine, northwest of Paris, and a command that ran from the Netherlands to the Loire. 15th Army held the Pas-de-Calais, 7th Army held Normandy and Brittany, and the whole of it was building beach obstacles, flooding low ground and laying mines on Rommel's personal timetable. He also inherited an argument that had already been lost. Rommel wanted the panzer divisions forward, within reach of the beaches, on the theory that Allied air power would make any daylight move impossible. Leo Geyer von Schweppenberg and Gerd von Rundstedt wanted them held back for a concentrated counterstroke inland. Hitler split the difference in the worst available way. 3 divisions to Geyer, 3 to Rommel's operational control, and 4 held as strategic reserve that no one could move without his personal order. That arrangement was still in force on the 6th of June. The 12th SS Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr sat in OKW Reserve. The 21st Panzer Division, the closest armor to the British beaches, did not get its orders until close to 0900 hours. The 12th SS was not ordered forward until 1430 hours, better than 12 hours after the first landing reports, and Rundstedt had already sent more than half of it chasing dummy parachutists near Lisieux. Its leading elements reached the assembly area near Evrecy at 2200 hours, and its Panther Battalion ran dry east of the Orne. Rommel was not there. He had driven to Herrlingen for his wife's birthday, and to argue with Hitler for more armor. Speidel had the headquarters. Quick note before the next part. 50 German commanders, admirals, and airmen. 824 licensed photographs, 1 book, and every entry the same: final rank, commands, operations decorations, fate, then what the record holds against what was claimed. A separate volume carries 746 of those photographs in color, restored and upscaled from the originals. GermanCommand.com, check for yourself. The first thing that broke in Normandy was not the line. It was the command. Friedrich Dollmann, commanding 7th Army in the invasion sector, was dead on the 28th of June, officially of a heart attack, with an inquiry into the loss of Cherbourg hanging over him. Paul Hauser took the army. On the 2nd of July, Rundstedt was relieved as Commander-in-Chief West and replaced by Klug, and Geyer von Schweppenberg was relieved of Panzer Group West and replaced by Heinrich Eberbach. Inside 5 days, the theater commander, an army commander, and the armored commander were all new men. Speidel and his operations staff at La Roche-Guyon stayed where they were. In a headquarters that loses its superiors at that rate, the chief of the general staff becomes the continuity, and the continuity is where the paperwork lives. By the middle of July, the campaign had settled into a defensive battle that Army Group B could not win and was not permitted to abandon. The British attacked east of Caen on the 18th of July and were stopped inside 3 days. The Americans broke the western end of the line open on the 25th. Hitler's answer was a counterattack toward Avranches on the 7th of August, which walked the remaining German armor into a pocket, and the pocket closed at Falaise on the 21st. Speidel ran the headquarters through all of it, and through all of it, a second story was running inside the same building. He was in contact with the conspiracy against Hitler. That is not disputed. He had approached others, and the evidence is that he worked on Rommel through the spring of 1944 to bring him in. What Rommel actually agreed to is one of the most contested questions in the literature, and I will come back to it. On the 17th of July, 1944, Rommel's staff car was strafed by Allied fighters near Sainte-Foy-de-Montgomery on the way back from 1st SS Panzer Corps. The driver lost control. Rommel took 3 skull fractures and severe facial injuries and was out of the war. 3 days later, the bomb went off at Rastenburg and failed. The failure ran through Paris before it ran through anywhere else, and it ran through the exact office Speidel had handed over 2 years earlier. On the evening of the 20th of July, Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, as military commander in France, ordered his staff to arrest the entire SS and security police apparatus in Paris. They did it. The higher SS and police leader in France and the head of the security service in Paris both spent the night in custody, and for a few hours the German army physically held the police organs of the regime in the capital of occupied France. Then Rastenburg came on the radio with Hitler alive. Günther von Kluge refused to move, and the prisoners were let out before dawn. Stülpnagel was recalled to Berlin. He stopped at Verdun on the way, walked to the bank of the Meuse, and shot himself in the head. He survived and blinded himself. He was tried before the People's Court on the 30th of August and hanged at Plötzensee the same day. Klug took Army Group B on top of his existing command in the west. Speidel stayed as chief of staff and, by his own later account and by the German scholarship on the resistance, went to work on Klug the way he had worked on Rommel. Klug, who had been circling the conspiracy for 2 years without committing to it, did nothing. On the 17th of August, he was relieved and took poison on the road home. Walter Model arrived at La Roche-Guyon the same day. The German account of that first meeting has Speidel telling Model that the best course was to come to an arrangement with the Allies in the West in order to get a free hand in the East. Model deflected and changed the subject. He did not report it. That is a memoir-sourced item, and I flag it as such. It rests on Speidel's own testimony and on post-war accounts of the resistance. There is no contemporaneous document that carries it. What is documented is what Model did next, which was to keep Speidel in post for 3 more weeks, while Berlin asked for his head. On the 7th of August, Dietrich von Koltitz had been appointed commander of Greater Paris with something like 20,000 troops. On the 23rd of August, Hitler cabled that Paris must not fall into enemy hands except as a field of ruins. Speidel's account, and Koltitz's account, is that the two of them arranged between themselves that the order would not be executed. Paris was surrendered on the 25th. Both accounts are memoirs written by the men in question, after the war, with reputations in play. The counter-argument in the current literature is that Koltitz had already lost effective control of the city to the resistance, and could not have carried out a systematic demolition even if he had tried. I think the honest position is that the order was not executed, that both men later claimed the credit, and that neither claim is carried by a contemporaneous document. There is one more item from that week, and it is the sharpest. On the 26th of August, Alfred Jodl telephoned Army Group B with Hitler's order to bring Paris under V1 and V2 fire. Model was not available. Speidel took the call and did not pass the order to his commander. That item comes through the German literature and traces to Speidel's own post-war account. Treat it as his claim until someone produces the OKW telephone log. 4 days later, on the 30th of August, General Wilhelm Bergdorf, head of the Army Personnel Office, demanded Speidel's removal on the grounds that he was strongly suspected of involvement on the 20th of July. Model refused. The Gestapo investigation had been working outward from Paris since the plot collapsed. Stulpnagel, unconscious after the Meuse, had repeatedly said Rommel's name. Caesar von Hofecker, Stulpnagel's staff officer, named Rommel under interrogation. On the 27th of September, Martin Bormann put a memorandum in front of Hitler, stating that the defendants had testified that Rommel knew of the assassination plan and had agreed to serve the new government. Model's protection ran out in the first week of September. General Lieutenant Hans Krebs took over as chief of the General Staff of Army Group B. On the 7th of September, 1944, the Gestapo arrested Speidel. He was 46 years old. What happened next is the mechanism that decided whether officers lived or died in the autumn of 1944, and it is worth stating precisely because it is constantly described as a trial, and it was not one. The Ehrenhof der Wehrmacht, the Court of Honor, was a board of senior officers with a single power. It could expel an officer from the armed forces. An officer expelled lost military jurisdiction and went to Roland Freisler's People's Court, which in these cases meant a rope and a filmed execution. An officer not expelled stayed inside the military system, which in practice meant custody without charge and without an end date. The board sat with Wilhelm Keitel and Gerd von Rundstedt as field marshals, General Oberst Heinz Guderian, General der Infanterie Walter Schroth, and General Lieutenant Karl Wilhelm Specht, with General Major Ernst Meisel keeping the record. Guderian had taken over the Army General Staff on the 21st of July, the morning after the bomb, and he sat on that board as the serving head of the institution the accused had come out of. On Speidel, the board found in the German nicht schuldig, aber nicht frei von Verdacht. Not guilty, but not free from suspicion. He was not expelled. He never saw the People's Court. It is worth holding the scale of what he was not sent into. The figures usually given for the aftermath of the 20th of July are around 7,000 arrests and close to 5,000 executions across the following 10 months. Those are estimates rather than counts. They circulate without a consistent underlying source, and I flag them as such rather than drop them, because the order of magnitude is not in dispute, even where the totals are. What is not an estimate is the procedure. Freisler's court took the plot cases in batches, sentence followed conviction within hours, and the hangings at Plötzensee were filmed on the regime's own instruction. That was the machinery on the far side of a decision to expel. The board declined to open the door. In the questioning, he named Rommel. That has been used against him for 70 years, and it needs the qualifier the sources actually support. The biographer Maurice Remy's assessment is that Speidel's statements did not betray Rommel because the interrogators already had Rommel's name from Hofecker and from Stulpnagel. I think that is the right reading of the sequence, and the dates support it. Bormann's memorandum to Hitler is dated the 27th of September. Speidel had been in custody for 20 days by then, and the men who supplied the name had supplied it in July and August. Hofecker did not get the same finding. He was condemned by the People's Court at the end of August and hanged at Plötzensee on the 20th of December, 1944. The staff officer who put Rommel's name into the record died for it. The chief of staff, whose name was already in the record, went to a fortress cell and came out of the war alive. That is not a moral observation. It is the difference between being expelled from the officer corps and not being expelled from it. And in the autumn of 1944, that was the only distinction that mattered. Rommel wrote to Hitler on the 1st of October asking for Speidel's release. That letter is standard in the Rommel literature. I have not been able to trace it to an archival citation independent of the Rommel papers, so take it as reported rather than verified. 13 days later, on the 14th of October 1944, Burgdorf and Meisel arrived at Rommel's house at Herrlingen and gave him the choice between the People's Court and a capsule. Rommel took the capsule. The official notice said embolism. There was a state funeral at Ulm, and Rundstedt represented Hitler at it without knowing what he was representing. Speidel was in a cell when it happened. The headquarters went on without him, and it did not have a quiet autumn. Krebs was running the Army Group B staff when the British Airborne Divisions came down on Arnhem on the 17th of September, with Model's command post practically inside the drop zone. 3 months later, the same headquarters ran the Ardennes offensive with 3 armies under it. In April 1945, it was encircled in the Ruhr, dissolved by Model's own order, and Model shot himself. Krebs by then had gone east to the Army General Staff and would die in Berlin. Of the men in that operations room in the summer of 1944, the one who spent the last 8 months of the war in a cell is the one who lived to write about it. He was held first by the Gestapo, and then at the fortress prison at Kustrin on the Oder, alongside Ernst Wurmer, General van Ruhl, and General Theodor Groppe. 7 months of custody in total, none of it under charge. The dating of what came next is loose in the sources, and I will say so rather than paper over it. Soviet spearheads reached the Oder at Küstrin at the end of January 1945, and the fortress there held out until the 30th of March. The German account of Speidel's captivity has the prisoners moved the length of Germany to Immenstadt on Lake Constance and held in the house chapel of Schloss Herzberg by April. Somewhere in that window, the transfer happened. The account does not give a date, and I'm not going to supply one that no document supports. What is not in doubt is the ending. With the help of the commandant and of Palatine priests, the prisoners got out ahead of the SS and went to ground at Urnau, in the hills above the lake. French troops reached them on the 29th of April 1945. 9 days later, the war was over. Now set the two halves of the arc against each other because the same measures read very differently on either side of that cell. Take rank. In June 1940, at the Majestic, he was an Oberstleutnant in the General Staff, a lieutenant colonel, running the command staff of an occupied country. On the 14th of June, 1957, he was promoted general in the Bundeswehr, 4 stars, the first officer of the new German army to reach that rank. Take the force. In the summer of 1944, Army Group B fought the campaign that produced the heaviest German loss rate of the Western War. The reported German loss return from the 6th of June to the 14th of August is 158,930 men. The full figure for the West that summer is 289,000, broken down as 23,019 killed, 67,060 wounded, and 198,616 missing. In the Falaise pocket alone, the Allies counted around 10,000 German dead and took around 40,000 prisoners. Across the campaign, the Allies took 233,000 German prisoners and lost something on the order of 226,000 of their own killed, wounded, and missing. 13 years later, the same officer commanded the ground forces of the alliance that had produced those figures, on the same continent, against a different enemy. Take the executions. 810 people were shot as hostages in the 2 German command zones of occupied France. Speidel's command staff drafted the procedure for the larger of those zones. In 1963, he received the Grand Cross with star and sash of the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic. Take the headquarters. In June 1944, he was the senior staff officer of an army group defending a coastline it did not have the divisions to hold. In April 1957, he was the operational commander of the ground forces of the alliance built to hold Central Europe against the Red Army, at a headquarters in the country his old staff had occupied. Take custody. 7 months in 1944 and 1945, 6 years and 5 months in NATO command. None of those pairs is an argument. They are the two ends of the same file. The bridge between them was built quickly, and it was built by policy. He went to the University of Tübingen as professor of modern history. In 1949, he published Invasion 1944 with the Tübingen Haus Wunderlich, and the English translation came out of Regnery in Chicago the following year as Invasion 1944, or Rommel and the Normandy campaign. It made Rommel a resistor in the American reading public's mind, and it made Speidel the authority on Rommel. He was not the only one writing. The United States Army's Historical Division had put Franz Halder at the head of a control group of former German officers, producing the operational history of the Eastern Front for their captors. Those studies became the backbone of Western understanding of the German Army for a generation, and their authors had pensions, reputations, and in some cases pending proceedings in play while they wrote. This is the environment Invasion 1944 was published into. A German general's account of the war was not an obscure document in 1950. It was a wanted commodity. In 1950, Konrad Adenauer needed a German army and could not say so out loud. From the 5th to the 9th of October, 1950, 15 former Wehrmacht officers met at the Cistercian Abbey at Himmerod in the Eifel and produced a 40-page memorandum on a German contingent for the defense of Western Europe. Speidel was in the room. So were Heusinger, Hans Röttiger, Johann Adolf Graf von Kielmansegg, Wolf Graf von Baudissin, Friedrich Ruge, and Heinrich von Wittinghoff. Read what that memorandum asks for. It does not only ask for divisions, it asks for the release of German soldiers convicted as war criminals, for an end to what it calls the defamation of the German soldier, including the Waffen-SS, and for measures to change domestic and foreign opinion about the German military. I think Himmerod is the hinge document of the entire post-war German officer story, and it is a hinge because it is a bill. Rearmament was the service. Those 3 demands were the price. There is a second thing in that room, and it pulls the other way. Wolfgraf von Baudissin sitting at the same table as the officer who went on to write Innere Führung, the doctrine of the citizen in uniform that was built specifically to stop the new army from reproducing the old one. The demand to release convicted soldiers and the doctrine designed to prevent a second Wehrmacht were drafted by the same working group in the same week. That is not a contradiction anyone smoothed over later. It is what the founding document of the Bundeswehr actually looks like, and Detlef Bald's history is largely an argument about which half of it won. The price was paid, and it was paid on a schedule. The West German amnesty law of December 1949 came first. In January 1951, the American High Commissioner announced the clemency decisions that emptied most of Landsberg. In May 1951, the Bundestag passed the law under Article 131 of the Basic Law, which put dismissed officials and professional soldiers back into public employment. A second amnesty followed in 1954. Norbert Frey laid out that machinery in Vergangenheitspolitik, published in English as Adenauer's Germany and the Nazi Past. And his argument is that the integration of the compromised was not a failure of the young republic, but a deliberate and successful policy of it. Detlef Bald's critical history of the Bundeswehr traces what that policy did to the founding of the new army. Neither historian needs an adjective to make the point. The demands are in the text, and the statutes are in the record. From there, it is a straight run. Military advisor to Adenauer in 1950, into the Amt Blank in January 1951, chief West German delegate to the European Defense Community Treaty. Conferences from 1951 to 1954. The French National Assembly killed that treaty in August 1954. The fallback was faster and larger. West Germany entered NATO in May 1955, and Speidel was in the negotiating team that got it there. On the 12th of November 1955, in the Ermekale barracks in Bonn, Theodor Blank handed appointment certificates to the first 101 soldiers of the Bundeswehr. Speidel and Heusinger were the first two generals in it, both Generalleutnant. The date was chosen for the 200th birthday of Gerhard von Scharnhorst, and Blank used the occasion to say that the new force was not a continuation of the Wehrmacht, and that its soldiers were citizens in uniform. 10 days later, Speidel took over Department 4 of the Defense Ministry, the Combined Forces Department. The move to France came next. The command he took was not ceremonial, and it was not a German command. Time magazine, reporting the nomination, listed 4 British divisions in Germany among the formations that would answer to him, alongside the American and French forces on the Central Front. His own service had almost nothing in the field yet. The German officer at Fontainebleau was commanding other people's armies, on ground his own army had held, against a threat from the direction his own army had been destroyed in. That is the shape of the appointment, and it is why both governments wanted it and why it was fought over. The objections were public, and they were specific. On the 22nd of January 1957, the French National Federation of Deportees and Internees formally objected to the French government, tying Speidel's name to the German military command in France responsible for the shooting of French hostages and the deportation of Frenchmen. Time magazine ran the appointment on the 4th of February and reported that the French government itself had proposed him. Both of those things are true at once, and that is the whole story of 1957 in one line. East Berlin ran a sustained campaign on his war record throughout the period, and so did the West European press. There is an archive of it, the Benjamin Segalowitz papers, held in Israel and catalogued through the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure, contain a file of press clippings on the Nazi pasts of Speidel and Heusinger running from 1952 to 1962. 10 years of cuttings on 2 men. The argument this video is having was already being had in public while both of them were still serving. The East German material has to be handled with the same rule as the memoirs. In 1960, Speidel won libel damages against an East German film studio over a portrayal that had him complicit in the killings of 1934 and in the betrayal of Rommel, neither of which the record supports. A propaganda apparatus that inflates a true file into a false one does not thereby make the true file go away, and it does not get to be the reason nobody reads it. He left the NATO command in September 1963. The German account attributes the timing to pressure from Charles de Gaulle, who had returned to power in 1958 and who regarded Speidel's Paris service as disqualifying. Kielmansegg, who had also been at Himmerod, took the command after him. Speidel retired in March 1964 at 66 and became president of the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik that October, the German government's principal foreign and security policy institute. He published his recollections, Aus unserer Zeit, in 1977. He died at Bad Honnef on the 28th of November, 1984, aged 87. The Bundeswehr named the barracks at Bruchsal after him in November 1997. Now the record itself, which is a separate object from the life. For roughly 40 years, the standard account of Hans Speidel in English came from Hans Speidel. Invasion 1944 established the frame. Rommel as the professional who saw the war was lost, Speidel as the chief of staff who tried to get him to act. The Paris years as an administrative interlude, handled by a Francophile officer who liked the country. That frame went to American popular history almost unopposed. Joseph Campo's doctoral dissertation at the University of California, Santa Barbara, filed in 2019, traces the American reception of the book in detail and shows how thin the scrutiny was. The scholarship that dismantled the frame is mostly not in English. Ulrich Meyer's work on the German occupation of France, and specifically on the link between the suppression of the resistance and the persecution of the Jews, came out in 2000. Peter Lieb's study of German warfare and counter-partisan operations in France in 1943 and 44 followed in 2007. Gail Eisman's Hotel Majestic, in 2010, is the institutional history of the headquarters Speidel ran, built out of its own files, and it establishes that the escalation of the summer and autumn of 1941 was driven from inside that building and not simply imposed on it from Berlin. Bergutz put the Junger Commission on the record in 2003. Kruger put Speidel's deportation proposal on the record in 2021. There's a wider version of the same finding on the Eastern Front. Johannes Herder's study of the German army commanders in the war against the Soviet Union in 1941 and 42, built out of their own private papers, found the professional soldier and the participant in an ideological war running through the same men at the same desks. The majestic evidence points the same way in a different theater. The men who argued hardest that the shootings were counterproductive were the men who signed the procedure that governed them. Kruger's conclusion is worth stating plainly because it is where the honest disagreement sits. He finds that Speidel committed no prosecutable war crime in Paris, that responsibility for the deportations to Auschwitz from March 1942 lies elsewhere and after his departure, and that Speidel was at minimum informed and partly involved through the staff sections under him. He then weighs the Paris service against the NATO service and comes down on the side of the NATO service. I think the weighing is the weakest part of an otherwise valuable book. Kruger's own documents are the strongest thing in it. A conclusion that balances a career against a career is not a document claim and cannot be checked against one. The proposal to substitute deportation for shooting can be checked, and Kruger is the man who checked it. That finding will outlive the verdict attached to it. The Rommel question runs the same way. Russell Hart's chapter on Speidel argues there is no credible evidence that Rommel was more than superficially connected to the conspiracy. Peter Lieb reads the circumstantial evidence as supporting Speidel's account. Papers that surfaced in 2018 from the estates of Rudolf Hartmann and Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel put meetings at Marais Marly and placed Rommel closer to the planning by late May 1944. A recorded conversation in British captivity has Heinrich Eberbach reporting Rommel saying that Hitler and the men around him had to be killed. I think the strongest single piece of evidence in that argument is the Bormann Memorandum, and I think it proves something narrower than it is usually made to prove. It establishes what the conspirators said under interrogation and what Hitler was told. It does not establish what Rommel agreed to. Those are different questions, and the literature has been running them together since 1950. There is one more document in this file that I do not think gets read closely enough, and it is the Court of Honor's own formula. A board that finds an officer not guilty does not normally attach a second clause about suspicion. That wording is not a finding of fact. It is an instrument. It let the board decline to hand a general staff officer to Freisler without conceding that the investigation had come up empty, which would have been an attack on the men running the investigation. Speidel's survival is usually written up as a personal escape, or as the loyalty of Keitel, Rundstedt, and Guderian to one of their own. I think the wording says something narrower and more useful than either. The board was defending the Army's jurisdiction over its own officers, and Speidel was the beneficiary of that rather than the object of it. He walked out of that room into an open-ended cell instead of a courtroom, which is precisely what a compromise of that shape produces. A lot of you in the comments have been asking for the men who ran the staffs, rather than the men whose names went on the operations. This is what that request looks like when it is answered out of the files. The chief of the general staff is the officer whose department drafts the procedure, whose initials sit on the routing slip, and whose name is not on the battle. One more thing about the two books. Speidel's memoirs are, as memoirs are, evidence of what their author wanted believed. On Normandy, they are detailed and largely checkable against the operational record, which is why they were useful to historians for decades. On Paris, they are selective in a way that only became visible once the headquarters files had been worked through, and that happened after he died. That is not an accusation. It is the ordinary condition of the genre, and it is why the file and the book get read side by side, rather than one instead of the other. So here is what the record contains. Hans Speidel ran the command staff of the German military command in France from the summer of 1940 to March 1942, through the period in which that headquarters wrote the hostage procedure for the occupied zone and carried out the reprisal shootings of the autumn of 1941. He argued against the shootings on grounds of effect, and he proposed deportation to the east as the alternative to them. He ordered the compilation of the Junger Memorandum on the same subject. He served as chief of the General Staff of 5th Army Corps, of Army Detachment Kempf, and of 8th Army on the Eastern Front, through Kharkov and Kursk, and was decorated for it. He was Rommel's chief of staff at Army Group B from April 1944 and ran that headquarters through the Normandy campaign and the retreat to the Seine. He was in contact with the conspiracy against Hitler, was arrested for it on the 7th of September 1944, was found not guilty but not free from suspicion by the Court of Honor, and spent 7 months in custody without charge. He wrote the book that made Rommel a resistor in the English-speaking world. He sat at Himmerod. He was one of the first 2 generals of the Bundeswehr. He commanded NATO's Central European land forces for 6 years and 5 months, and was pushed out of that command by the French head of state over what he had done in Paris. All of it is the same man, and all of it is in the same file. That's what the record shows. The sources are in the description. I'll see you in the next one.